Right, so the House of Lords, as they so frequently seem to do, have finally backed down over Rishi Sunak's Rwanda Bill, and it has therefore passed. Perhaps after seeing nearly £250 million spaffed on this scheme so far, with Sunak seemingly intent on spending whatever it takes to see this happen, they figure a return was needed. Perhaps they were just sick and tired of debating this as the night drew on. Late-night votes, a tactic to force the hands of tired peers, though given how often we see peers sleeping on the job anyway, I'm really not sure why this is so off-putting to some of them. But in all seriousness, as invariably happens, the peers decide to acknowledge the primacy of the House, as they put it, which is to say, they throw in the towel and let the Commons get its way. This is supposed to be Sunak's big deterrent to those crossing in small boats, but it won't be. It's doomed to fail, and more people will die trying to cross. 5 more fatalities in the Channel happening as this law was being debated in the Lords, just to prove it. This plan is doomed to fail. It cannot possibly work for all manner of reasons, and when it fails, things will get consistently worse for the Tories' electoral chances, and deservedly so. Right, so the Rwanda Bill has passed the Lords stage. It'll now go on to get royal assent and pass into law. Sunak is positively bouncing with glee. His people, the likes of his own parents who came here as migrants, people who come here to seek asylum, now face deportation to Rwanda instead. Or do they, really? There's a number of reasons for that. But for one, because you can pass all manner of crackpot shithousery into law, just because it becomes a law does not mean it is good or right or even workable. And when it inevitably blows up in the Tories' faces yet again, because it always does, the blame game will begin again. Keir Starmer, well, he can smile to himself as the votes just come rolling in for him in response, despite doing and standing for absolutely nothing, or absolutely nothing different, because the Tories become seen yet again, as indeed they are, as stupefyingly incompetent and idiotic. The Rwanda scheme is a ball and chain around their necks, yet they can't resist, for some reason, putting it on and wearing it. They can't resist it. It's like punching themselves in the face and calling it winning votes. So it's law now then. Great, fine, fabulous, wonderful, not. So when will the first flights take off then? Well, Sunak's gurning all over right now, saying July, no ifs or buts. However, there is one big but here, a very big fat elephant of a butt in the room, a big elephant butt, which is who is going to fly these people to Rwanda. Who's going to do it then? Which airline is prepared to do so? Because they weren't exactly queuing up at the door of number 10 to accept these contracts before, were they? Well, one body advising airlines to give this work a very wide berth is the UN, who have issued a warning to airlines not to take up these flights, not to accept the work, because if they do, they could be held responsible for violations of international humanitarian law themselves. Both airlines and their regulators could end up in the dock being found guilty of complicity in any human rights violations as a result of people being sent to Rwanda under this scheme, under this stupid Sunak law. But I'll come back to the legalities of this story in a moment. Because if major airlines are not likely to want to risk being grounded over accusations of human rights violations, charges of human trafficking even, well, none of this would be very good for business, is it? So then who would be willing to do it? Well, it seems Sunak has possibly thought of that already. And again, proving that money is no object when it's ours he's spending, because Sunak is apparently going to charter private flights. An airfield and commercial charter planes are apparently already booked for specific flights to Rwanda now. Well, how much is that costing us then? Well, we don't know the charter company. We don't know the deal the government might have done with them. We don't know an awful lot publicly. But what we do know, what is obvious, is that it is going to be a damn sight more expensive than a standard commercial flight. I went into a flight booking site just for shits and giggles, really, just to see if I could get an idea for how much it could be and what savings might have been there if they'd taken an ordinary flight. So I went on to kayak.com, and an economy flight on Rwandair from Heathrow to Kigali with them cost £591 if I planned on leaving on the 6th of May. Now, last month, James Cleverly, our misnamed Home Secretary, well, he went to Rwanda to sign a new treaty over these deportations, and he just so happened to take a private chartered flight, which apparently cost £165,000. It's amazing the Tories can find money for whatever they want for themselves, whilst letting public services fall into ruin, isn't it? It's our money, but they will not spend it in our interest, will they? Why do we keep electing these people? Now, I can't say the disparity will be as great as that. We don't know. It's just me doing a spitball bit of an experiment, bit of window shopping, as it were. Though I do find it entertaining that Rwanda literally have their own flagship airline, Rwandair, and they evidently won't let them be used for these flights either. That really is a big red flag, isn't it? It's a big klaxon if they won't even allow people to be put on these flights of their own airline. Whatever the final price tag is, though, it will be dearer than ordinary flights the likes of us would take. But of course, this all predicates upon these flights getting off the ground. They were stopped before. They will almost certainly be stopped again. Legislating that Rwanda is a safe country was stupid, when under international law it is recognised as clearly not being, and under a ruling from our own Supreme Court as well, that it isn't either. Making laws to circumvent the Supreme Court ruling is one thing. Stupid, obviously, but going to the European Court of Human Rights will ground those flights anyway. It isn't a foreign court, as Sunak keeps inferring, it is an international court. And of course we have the spectre of Sunak threatening to take us out of the EHRC if they choose to stop these flights, which they will, and they'll clog the system up by taking on cases on an individual basis amongst those chosen to be deported. But let's not forget that for all of Sunak's posturing about taking us out of the EHRC, it wouldn't actually matter, because assuming the migrants are coming from another UN member state, they'll be entitled to EHRC representation versus our own system at that point, with us having joined the likes of Russia and Belarus as international pariahs outside of the EHRC. Legislation that this country helped to write, which just goes to show how far down the tubes this country has gone in the governments it keeps electing. It's a heck of a step down that road, I appreciate. We're a long way down the road. The bigger question I have, given none of us elected Sunak to run the country, though, is who does he even think he is even suggesting this? But that's the extent he says he'd take us to, if needs be, to get those flights off the ground. All of our human rights having gone in the bin to get to that point as well. The entitlement of this guy really is something else. I always thought Boris Johnson was peak entitlement. Rishi Sunak, having never been elected by anybody, going this far with this country, and he just feels like it's his God-given right because he's wealthy. God, I do despise wealthy politicians because they always turn out to be the worst, but they're not. Is it just me that thinks that? I somehow doubt it. Anyway, digressing slightly, and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit there as well. Suffice to say, legal challenges will again cripple matters here. Almost certainly past the point of a general election, Sunak is hell-bent on losing, it seems, and as this fails, he'll lose even more heavily. He doesn't seem to see that, though. So no sympathy from anyone either. Keep adding to the costs at this point too, of course, because as I said at the start, we're already nearly £250 million into this with Rwanda, with not a single migrant having been deported yet. As for how many migrants will be deported, well, the Home Office are currently only preparing a list for the first flight that probably won't take off anyway, so all this gump, all this Sunak posturing. And they haven't even got the list of people they're sending yet. But the first list of 200 migrants is currently being drawn up. Yes, all of 200 migrants, and that is as many as we will be sending to Rwanda each year. That works out as 0.7% of all migrants who came to Britain and claimed asylum in the whole of 2023, let alone all of those from before still stuck in an asylum backlog. Some 128,000 people still, as I understand it to be at this moment in time. That's according to a BBC piece from the end of last month. And just 200 of them can expect to be put on a flight to Rwanda for the year. So asylum seekers have a 1 in 640 chance of being sent to Rwanda this year anyway. And if we take the cost as it already stands at what we spent on this ridiculous Rwanda scheme already, bearing in mind those costs will almost certainly rise as court cases and the cost of these flights come into effect as well. Based on the figures we know right now, though, those first 200 asylum seekers will have cost us £1.2 million apiece to send there. Do you really think that's cheaper than just housing them here? Or is that money well spent just to appease your racism and bigotry? Each migrant could on that basis have paid for half a dozen houses to be built, paid the annual salary of 40 teachers or nurses. The waste is incredible and doesn't even put a dent in the asylum backlog. The chances of anyone being sent there are next to nil, and so it shouldn't be a surprise that this isn't putting asylum seekers off. Fundamentally, this is where the policy failure is its most damning, because the boats are still going to come. This is not going to stop the boats. And nothing underlines the failure of this policy will be more than the reported deaths of 5 more people trying to cross the channel as the Lords were debating this last night, and finally relenting. The I paper reported that at least 5 migrants are reported to have died off the coast of France. A police operation is underway on Tuesday morning after an attempt to cross the channel. French newspaper La Voix du Nord reported at least 5 migrants have died. It is reported that the French Coast Guard said there was a failed attempt to cross the channel and police were at the beach after the incident. They will still come. There's next to no chance that they will be sent to Rwanda. They may be stuck in the system for a long time even before they do, if they are one of the ones that is seemingly picked out of the lottery machine to go there. But that is down to Tory failure to invest in public services, in this case, asylum processing. The money they've blown on this Rwanda vanity project to appeal, frankly, just to racist and bigots for their votes would have been better used in that. Rather than send these people to Rwanda and risk legal cases, delays all costing vastly more of our money, the figures of views, as I've said, are based on things as they stand now. They will get far worse as the Tories throw more money at it, as they inevitably will, and likely get nowhere further. A sane government would have gone down the road of a new returns policy with the EU, so that we take our fair share of migrants, but also migrants that come here may be sent to other countries too. We don't have to rejoin the EU for that to be possible. If you're worried about where to house them, ask the government why they failed to build housing sufficient to meet their obligations, not only to asylum, but to all of us struggling with housing here. The failure is the government's, so do not blame the migrants. If the government wanted to save lives and stop people drowning in the Channel, they could create a legal asylum route, but they won't, and we haven't had one since Blair got rid of the last one we had. Simple legislative moves to save lives and invest in the system to process these claims, doing our fair share, but not having to do more than that. And instead the Tories have turned the whole thing into one big fat culture war, which is costing us an arm and a leg and costing people whose lives could be saved otherwise. In a desperate last bid just to what? To save their electoral chances that have seemingly gone up in smoke already. And doesn't it prove just how detached from reality they all are, but especially that worm Sunak, that this is what he thinks appeals to us to vote for him? It's no wonder his party faces extinction, does it? If it's a party that thinks like that, does it not deserve extinction? Meanwhile, another problem with the Rwanda scheme that positively shattered poor Suella Braverman's deportation dreams is the fact that all the lovely housing she implied we were paying for to house these asylum seekers, the housing she went and visited, do you remember that? She cackled outside of it. It's been sold off to local Rwandans because actually we weren't paying for it at all. All the housing that she showed up for and visited and did a big puff piece in the papers was affordable housing being half paid for by the Rwandan state. For Rwandans. Surely they didn't lie to us, Damo. Oh, they did. Find out all about that little nugget on this video recommendation here. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.